Wild West stories. Why did the cowboy's daughter whisper, "She's beautiful, Papa"? Sometimes what our eyes see is not what our hearts should feel. Arizona, 1848. Winter in 1848 came to Arizona like an uninvited guest, wild and merciless. The wind howled from the distant mountains, carrying razor-sharp flakes of snow that fell and blanketed the small town of Cedar Ridge. The main street, once choked with summer's red dust, now lay hidden beneath a heavy, blinding white. The sound of horses' hooves striking the snow was muffled slow and heavy, like a sorrowful ballad of the harsh West. Wooden houses lined the road, their chimneys breathing gray smoke into the sky, promising warmth inside. But that warmth was not meant for everyone. The stagecoach screeched to a stop, its wheels grinding against the ice. From within, a woman stepped down. Helena. Her trembling hand clutched a worn leather suitcase, not from the cold, though the freezing air stung her cheeks, but from a fear that ran deep to her very bones. Her face was flushed red by the wind, round cheeks and brown eyes lit with a fragile mix of anticipation and dread. She had traveled often in her life, but never had her steps felt so impossibly heavy. The moment her boots touched the snow-packed ground, the air at the depot seemed to harden. Murmurs stirred within the crowd. That's her, Peter Mackenzie's bride. Heavens, is that really who he's marrying? Snickers and mocking whispers cut sharper than the wind. Every glance thrown her way was a knife stripping away the thin layers of dignity she still clung to. Helena had known this would happen. In her letters to Peter, she had written of her honesty, her character, her skills in cooking, and herbs passed down from her mother. But there are things no ink on paper can explain. No letter could soften the way society judged a woman who was too large. At 30, Helena carried not only the scars of rejection, but the haunting belief that love was never meant for her. Peter Mackenzie stood apart across the crowd. The famed cowboy of Cedar Ridge, widowed, broad-shouldered, unyielding, towering like the sky itself. He said nothing, no greeting, no encouraging smile, only a gaze silent heavy, measuring her from head to toe. His silence was crueler than laughter. It said, he isn't sure. He's reconsidering. Helena lowered her eyes, her heart tightening. For an instant, she thought of fleeing, running back to anywhere less cruel than these judging stares. But then, something unexpected happened. From Peter's large hand slipped a smaller one. Liz, a girl of about 6, with hair like golden wheat and clear blue eyes, the eyes Helena knew must have belonged to her late mother. Liz stepped forward, timid yet determined, her tiny boots pressing innocent prints into the snow. The crowd hushed. Helena bent down, her heart trembling with fear and hope. Children, she knew, often reflected the prejudice of adults. She braced herself for rejection this time from the daughter of the man she was to marry. But Lise did not speak cruelty. Instead, she lifted a small, cold hand and touched Helena's cheek. Her blue eyes shone with a pure, untainted light, free of scorn, free of judgment. "She's beautiful, Daddy." The words rang clear in the winter air. A truth a child dared to voice when the whole town had refused to see. The crowd froze. The laughter died. The whispers vanished into the wind. Helena's eyes blurred, but not from the bitter tears of past rejections. For the first time in years, her tears were warm, sweet. Peter looked at his daughter, then at Helena. His expression changed little, but in his eyes, a crack appeared. Behind the ice, something stirred. In that fragile moment, as the storm quieted and the town held its breath, Helena knew her story would no longer be the same. The innocent words of a child had lit the first spark of hope, small, but enough to defy the harshest winter of her life. Part 1. The Stranger Wife. Peter Mackenzie's wooden house stood in solemn silence on a low hillside, gazing out over the snow-covered valley. Built from massive logs stacked one upon another, its shingled roof, thick its chimney, exhaling gray smoke. The place to outsiders was a symbol of a successful cowboy. A solid home, a vast ranch, and a herd of hundreds of cattle. But to Helena, the house felt more like a museum, one filled with memories that did not belong to her. From the moment she crossed the threshold, Helena sensed the lingering presence of another woman. Sarah, Peter's late wife. A portrait, hung in the parlor, showed a slender woman with braided blonde hair and gentle blue eyes. On the table, a vase of dried flowers rested in a cracked porcelain jar, once surely Sarah's favorite. In the corner, an old piano sat quietly, its ivory keys, yellowed with age, yet polished clean, as if still waiting to be played. Helena knew every corner of this house carried Sarah's imprint, and she, the second wife, was nothing more than a shadow, an inadequate substitute. Peter led her through the rooms, his voice flat and formal, as though reading from a list. This is the kitchen, firewood stacked out back. The storehouse is on the east side. Horses are kept in the corral. He never looked into her eyes, never softened his tone, never tried to ease the heavy silence. When they reached the bedroom, Helena paused. The large wooden bed was covered in a thick wool blanket, faintly scented with lavender oil. On the bedside table sat a small frame, Sarah holding Liz when she was a baby. Helena turned away, quickly swallowing the ache in her throat. Peter set down her suitcase in the corner. You may rearrange if you like, but don't move anything that belongs to Liz. The words were short, cool, and final. Without another glance, he left the room, leaving Helena in silence. The following days crept by, slowly weighed down by unspoken distance. Peter left home at dawn, riding out to the ranch to tend the cattle and mend fences, seldom returning before nightfall. Evenings brought brief, quiet meals. Helena prepared food. Lise ate heartily, and Peter rose after a few bites, muttering something about unfinished work. Helena was no stranger to neglect, but Peter's indifference was different. It was not rejection in open words, but a fortress of silence. He did not insult her, did not scold her, but neither did he reach out. She was treated like an object useful for keeping the house, caring for his daughter, but never acknowledged as a woman with feelings. In town, the stares of the townsfolk suffocated her further. At the general store, conversations hushed when she entered. Women bent their heads together in whispers. Men cast mocking glances. At church on Sundays, the pews around Helena remained conspicuously empty, as though no one dared sit near her. Once, while she was choosing fabric, Martha Whitman, the shopkeeper's wife, approached, feigning sweetness. "Oh, Mrs. Mackenzie, I hear you're quite the cook." Poor Peter must have forgotten the taste of Sarah's cakes by now, hasn't he? Her voice dripped with honey, but her eyes cut sharp as knives. Other women tittered behind her. Helena forced a smile, set down the fabric, and left in silence. She felt she belonged nowhere, not in the house, not in her husband's heart, and certainly not in the community. Lys was her only light. The little girl clung to Helena, following her everywhere. When Helena cooked, Lys perched on a stool by the stove, blue eyes wide, watching each motion. When Helena sewed, Lys sat at her feet, trying clumsily to stitch scraps of fabric. At night, when the wind howled through the cracks, Lys would appear at Helena's door, clutching her worn stuffed bear, whispering, "Can I sleep with you, Mama?" And in those moments, Helena's heart softened. She wrapped Lys in her arms, tucked the blanket close, and listened to her steady breathing. In the dark, she realized she was not entirely invisible. At least one soul needed her, and that love was so pure it melted the weight of sorrow. But that comfort was fragile, far too small against the burden of loneliness. One afternoon, Helena discovered an old wooden box in the attic. Inside were Sarah's keepsakes, a white lace wedding dress, a bundle of letters, and a slim diary. She turned its pages. The delicate handwriting spoke of happy days of tender worries during pregnancy. When she reached the line, "Peter always tells me I'm the most beautiful woman in town," Helena's chest tightened painfully. She closed the diary, tears spilling unchecked. Every object in this house, every memory reminded her that she was nothing more than the one who came after a flawed shadow of a woman no one could replace. That night, she sat alone by the fireplace, staring into the blaze. Outside, the wind shrieked and snow buried the ranch. A thought whispered bitterly in her mind, "Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I never should have come. Perhaps leaving would be easier for everyone." But then Lys appeared, bare in hand eyes, heavy with sleep. "Mama, will you tell me a bedtime story?" Helena brushed away her tears, smiling gently. "Of course, sweetheart." She told her the stories her own mother once told of wildflowers blooming in the desert, defying the burning sun and storming winds. And as she spoke, Helena realized perhaps she herself was like those flowers. Trampled, dismissed, but still capable of blooming if only she found the right soil. In the days that followed, Helena held fast to patience and kindness. She greeted the townsfolk despite their coldness. She kept the house cooked and cared for Lys with devotion, though Peter remained distant. Yet the weight of solitude never left her. Each time she passed Sarah's picture, each time someone spoke her name, Helena felt herself fading a mere stranger wife in the wide wooden house. And deep in her heart, she knew her true battle was not against the scorn of the townsfolk, but against the wall of ice surrounding her husband's heart. Part 2. A Little Love. Mornings in the Mackenzie cabin began with the sound of wind whistling through the cracks and the smell of pine wood burning in the fireplace. Helena often rose early, when the sky outside the window was still tinted violet and the first birds had yet to leave their nests. In the small kitchen, she lit the fire, set a pot of water to boil, and began preparing breakfast. It always happened the same way. Before she could finish her work, a soft sound stirred behind her. Tiny feet shuffled across the wooden floor. Lys, her hair tangled, clutching a worn stuffed bear, rubbing her eyes, yawning, then climbing onto the tall stool by the stove. "Mama, what are we having today?" Lys asked, voice still heavy with sleep, but her eyes bright with curiosity. Helena hesitated. The word "mama" fell upon her heart like a drop of warm water in frozen stone. She had never asked Lys to call her that. Perhaps it was nothing more than the unthinking innocence of a child. Yet hearing it even once gave Helena a reason to stay. "We're making cornbread," Helena replied, steadying her voice. Lys clapped her hands in delight. "Can I help?" From that day, Helena realized the kitchen was more than a place for cooking. It was a place where two hearts quietly reach for each other. Lys insisted on joining every task, kneading dough, measuring milk, even chopping vegetables. Her little fingers clumsy sending flour across the table, but her blue eyes shone with joy. Helena guided her patiently step by step, telling stories as they worked until Lys's laughter drowned out the winter's chill. At noon, meals in the cabin remained heavy with silence. Peter returned from the ranch, smelling of horses and hay. He ate quickly, rarely raising his head. Yet Helena noticed whenever Lys giggled and declared, "Mama taught me to make this," Peter paused for the briefest moment, his gaze flickering toward Helena with something unreadable. Still, the gulf between them yawned wide. Their words were sparse about firewood in the shed, or how the weather might affect the herd. Never once did Peter open his heart. Helena understood. Silence could be crueler than rejection. Nighttime was when Helena's heart felt both weakest and strongest. When the day's work was done, when the fire in the hearth burned low and the bedroom grew cold, she sat on the bed beneath the heavy wool blanket, surrounded by darkness. In that quiet, every memory, every mocking whisper from the townsfolk returned, choking her chest. And yet almost every night a soft knock came at the door. "Mama, the wind scares me. Can I sleep with you?" Lys stood there, eyes drowsy, clutching her old bear. Without waiting for an answer, she climbed into bed, burrowing into Helena's arms. The warmth of that small body spread, chasing away the cold. Helena held her close, kissing the soft hair. "Sleep, my love. Mama's here." In that moment, Helena felt she truly belonged. Not in Peter's heart, not in the townspeople's approval, but in the trusting embrace of a child. One night, Lys woke sobbing from a nightmare, calling out for her mother. Helena gathered her close, humming the lullabies her own mother once sang. Her voice trembled imperfect, but filled with love. Slowly, the sobs faded, replaced by the even breath of peaceful sleep. Helena sat silently in the dark, tears falling onto golden hair. She knew she could never replace Lys's mother. But perhaps she could become something new in the child's heart. As time passed, the habits of mother and daughter became unshakable. Lys waited for Helena in the kitchen each morning. In town, she boasted proudly, "Mama taught me to make this." At night, she sought Helena's arms whenever she needed comfort. And for Helena, what once felt like a life of emptiness now carried meaning. She saw that her presence was not in vain. Lys was the thread binding her to the world, the small but brilliant light bright enough to guide her through the darkness. Each evening before bed, Helena prayed quietly. Not for the townsfolk to change, not for Peter to open his heart. Only that Lys might be happy, might grow up surrounded by love. And in that prayer, Helena felt her heart anchored for the first time. In the wide cabin, still shadowed by the past, Helena remained lonely, still enduring her husband's distance and the town's disdain. But beside the kitchen fire, at the rough wooden table, and in the cold bed each night, she had found a little love, a love so pure and strong it kept her there. And from that little love, the seed of something miraculous began to grow fragile but alive, capable of changing Helena's fate in this house. Part 3. The Fateful Blizzard. The winter of 1848 had never been so fierce. In the first days of January, the wind howled relentlessly, and snow poured down, as if the heavens wished to bury Cedar Ridge beneath its weight. From the frozen window pane, Helena watched Peter ride out into the gray morning. He said little, only that he needed to check the herd grazing on the far range where the wind struck hardest. "I'll be back by noon," he told her, pulling his cloak tight. Helena nodded, though unease knotted in her chest. She had lived long enough to know that when nature turned wrathful, men became no more than leaves in the storm. Noon came and went. Twilight deepened snow, rising in heavy layers. Still, Peter had not returned. Helena forced a calm smile for Lys's sake, though the girl kept staring at the door, clutching her bear tight. "Mama, why isn't Papa home yet?" she asked, voice trembling. "He'll be here soon," Helena whispered, though her heart wavered. When the clock struck midnight and the wind roared louder than ever, Helena knew something was wrong. At first, she reached for her cloak, ready to go after him. But Lys clung to her skirts, crying, "Don't leave me, Mama." The tearing choice split Helena's heart. To go would mean abandoning Lys to the storm and her fear. To stay might mean Peter perishing out there, swallowed by the snow. Then a faint sound reached her ears. Amid the gale, a muffled groan from the direction of the barn. Wrapping Lys in blankets, Helena gathered the child into her arms and plunged outside. The wind slapped her face raw. Snowflakes stung like knives. Each step sank deep into drifts that rose to her knees. But that groan, weak fading, pulled her forward like a thread of fate. At the barn door, the sight made her heart clench. Peter lay sprawled in the snow beside his exhausted horse. One leg bent at a terrible angle, clearly broken. His face, pale lips tinged blue. "Peter," Helena cried, but the wind devoured her voice. There was no time to think. Setting Lys safely in the corner of the barn, she whispered, "Stay here, don't be afraid." Then, with every ounce of strength, she heaved Peter's body from the snow. He was heavy as stone, but some hidden power rose within her. Gritting her teeth, she dragged him inch by inch toward the cabin. Snow buried the path. Wind pushed her back. Her breath tore like knives in her chest. Yet one thought thundered within: "I cannot let him die. I cannot." At last, she hauled him inside, collapsing by the fire, trembling, drenched in sweat. But she did not stop. She stripped off his frozen cloak, wrapped him in blankets, and fed the flames high. The broken leg was dire. Helena remembered her mother's teachings: set the bone, bind it firm with splints. Her heart pounded as Peter groaned in agony when the bones snapped back into place, but her hands did not falter. Lys stood near, handing cloths and bowls of hot water, eyes wet with tears, but silent, brave. For 3 days and nights, Helena scarcely slept. She changed bandages, cooked broth, wiped fevered sweat from his brow. When fever raged, she sat by his side, holding his hand, whispering prayers into the dark. Lys, too, did her part, washing cloths, fetching water, with her small, determined steps. On the 3rd day, as Helena bent close to check his fever, Peter's eyes opened. The dull blue cleared, focusing. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as a burden, not as a replacement, but as the woman who had saved his life. His cracked lips moved voice hoarse, barely audible. "Thank you." In that moment, Helena broke down in tears. Not tears of despair, but of release of joy. For the first time, she saw the ice in his gaze begin to crack. In the days that followed, Peter lay, confined to bed. Helena bore the weight of everything: cooking, tending Lys, feeding the livestock, cleaning the stalls. Some evenings, she collapsed on the porch, the cold wind cutting her to the bone. Yet when she glanced back through the window and saw Lys smiling, or Peter watching quietly with a softened gaze, strength returned to her. On quiet nights, she sat by Peter's bed, reading passages of scripture or sharing stories from her past. He said little, but he listened. And in that silence, Helena felt something shifting. The fateful blizzard had tested more than endurance. It had opened a door in Peter's heart. The man once cold as stone had at last looked at Helena differently, with the eyes of one indebted, of one grateful, and perhaps of one learning again how to believe in love. And Helena, watching him drift from the edge of death back to life, realized her strength lay not in appearance nor in society's acceptance. Her true strength was love, the love that had driven her into the storm, that had wrestled him back from death's grasp. Part 4. The Awakening Man. Peter Mackenzie had never endured 3 days so long. Pain from his broken leg tormented him. Fever came and went, leaving him drifting between delirium and clarity. Yet through the haze, one image remained sharper than all others. Helena seated by his bed, her brown hair tousled from sleepless nights, her eyes darkened with weariness, but still burning with resolve. For the first time, Peter truly saw her. Not the heavy figure that the town mocked, not the replacement shadow he himself had labeled her. He saw the hands that never ceased moving, changing bandages, stirring broth, wiping sweat. He heard the low, steady voice, whispering comfort when fever blurred his mind. And above all, he saw her eyes, eyes that held a depth of love he had not felt in years. In those blurred moments between life and death, Peter understood this woman had fought the storm itself to save his life. Not for duty, not for pride, but for love, pure and unyielding. On the 4th day, the fever broke. When Peter opened his eyes, the glow of the firelight cast its warmth upon Helena's face. She was leaning close, her hand resting gently against his brow. His voice, raw and broken, whispered, "Helena." She started, then smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're awake. Thank God." Peter lay silent for a long time, emotions twisting within him. Shame, gratitude, and a gnawing regret he could not name. He remembered all the times he had turned away from her gaze, the evenings he had left the table too quickly, the way he had let her face the town's scorn alone. And now, this woman, the one he had dismissed, had saved him from death. "I was wrong," he murmured, voice thick. Helena froze the cloth in her hand, pausing mid-air. "What did you say?" Peter turned his face away, but there was no hiding anymore. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Helena said nothing at first, only lowered the cloth to his forehead. But tears fell suddenly onto his cheek. Warm tears. And Peter realized she was crying not from reproach, but because his words had touched the deepest wound in her heart. The days of recovery became a turning point. Forced to remain in bed, Peter found himself watching Helena in ways he never had before. He saw her patiently guiding Lys through the faded lines of the old Bible, turning verses into little stories that made the girl giggle. He saw her trudging outside into the cold, dragging logs, heavier than her frame, returning with cheeks flushed red, never once complaining. He saw her mending his worn coat, each stitch neat and careful, so precise it made his chest tighten. One afternoon, as the sunset bathed the cabin in crimson light, Peter watched Helena so intently that she finally looked up, flustered. "What is it?" she asked softly. Peter shook his head, lips trembling. He longed to tell her she was beautiful, that he was grateful, that he was ashamed of his blindness. But the words caught in his throat. The only truth beating in his chest was this woman was not only saving his body, she was saving his soul. That night, after Lys had fallen asleep, Helena sat by his bed to change his bandages. Peter looked at her hands, broad, roughened by work, calloused from hardship. Yet in his eyes, they were more beautiful than any hands he had ever held. Without thinking, he reached and clasped them. Helena, startled, tried to pull away, but Peter held firm. His voice broke. "Forgive me for not seeing you from the start." Helena was silent for a long time. Then she lifted her gaze, lashes wet, but her eyes clear as water. "I don't need your apology. Just don't turn away from me again." Peter nodded. And in that moment, an invisible wall crumbled. From then on, the air in the cabin changed. There was still silence, but no longer the cold emptiness. It became a quiet warmth, two souls sharing without need of words. Peter began listening as Helena spoke of her childhood, of summers spent gathering herbs with her mother, of the cruel laughter she had endured for her body. He listened without interruption, only holding her hand tightly. And Helena, for the first time since she set foot in Cedar Ridge, no longer felt invisible. The man who once turned his face away now looked at her, truly looked, and in his gaze there was no judgment, only recognition. "I was wrong." Peter's whispered words lingered in her heart like a small flame against the long winter nights. They did not erase the pain, nor did they change the town's scorn, but they were a beginning. For in a world of ice, sometimes one honest admission is enough to melt it. And for Helena, the moment of Peter's awakening was the greatest gift she had ever received. Part 5. Honor Before the Crowd. Spring of 1849 came late. The snow melted slowly, revealing muddy ground and trembling sprouts in the wind. But when the wildflowers began painting the fields gold, the town of Cedar Ridge burst into excitement, preparing for the spring festival, the grandest event of the year. Colorful banners adorned the square, a stage was erected, and long tables set with roasted meats, cakes, and cider. For Helena, the thought of attending tightened her chest. In all these months, whispers and mocking stares had never ceased. She had planned to remain home, hidden from the gaze of the town. But Lys was different. She skipped around the room, proudly showing off the blue dress Helena had sewn, insisting, "Mama has to come with me. I want everyone to see I have the best mother in the world." Peter listened silently as mother and daughter spoke. His eyes lingered long on Helena's face, where worry flickered. Then firmly, he said, "We will all go." As a family, festival day arrived and sunlight flooded the square. Violins played, laughter rang out. Children darted through the crowd. Women displayed their finest dresses. Yet when the Mackenzies appeared, the air shifted. Conversations halted Eyes turned in unison. Helena felt the weight of the stares, the sharp whispers, all too familiar. That's the fat wife Peter brought home. What was he thinking? They don't match at all. Her hands trembled. Instinct urged her to retreat, to flee back to the safety of the wooden house. But then something unexpected. Peter took her hand. Not the careless touch of duty, but a firm, public, proud clasp. He interlaced his fingers with hers, lifted their joined hands high for all to see. The crowd froze. Helena's eyes widened at her husband. But Peter did not waver. He stood tall, gaze sweeping across the square, voice ringing out, clear. Helena is my wife, the woman I love and respect. If anyone has something to say, speak it to me, not whispered behind her back. Silence fell. Men lowered their eyes. Women pressed their lips tight. Never had anyone seen Peter Mackenzie, the proud, cold cowboy, speak so fiercely, so openly. Helena stood stunned, her heart-pounding eyes burning with tears. All the months of shame, of bowed head and hidden pain dissolved in that moment. Beside her, Liz lifted her chin and declared brightly, "I told you, so Mama is the most beautiful in the world." Children's laughter rippled outward, breaking the tension. Music swelled once more. The townsfolk reluctantly resumed the festival, though the air had changed. The open jeers were gone. Some glances turned hesitant, even uneasy. Helena knew change would not come overnight, but Peter's public defense had planted a seed. As they passed the banquet tables, Mrs. Whitman, the woman who had mocked Helena most, murmured, "Perhaps I was mistaken," then turned away, hiding her discomfort. Helena heard it clearly, and deep inside a quiet satisfaction warmed her. Night fell lanterns glowing gold across the square. Couples filled the dance floor. Lise tugged at her father's hand. Pleading Papa dance with Mama, Peter did not refuse. He led Helena into the center before dozens of eyes. At first, her steps faltered, heavy with self-consciousness. But Peter whispered, "Just look at me. It's only us." They moved slowly, awkwardly, but with honesty. To Helena, it felt like a dream. The man who once turned away, now holding her openly, before the whole town, affirming her existence, not with promises, but with action. And for the first time, Helena no longer felt like the stranger wife. She was truly seen. That night back at the ranch, Helena sat by the window, watching snow melt at the eaves. The loneliness that had haunted her was breaking apart. Inside her chest, a warm flame burned bright. Not because the town had changed completely, but because she had found her place in the heart of the man beside her. And Helena knew, from this day on, every whisper would sound weaker, for she no longer stood alone against the world. Peter had chosen to stand with her. Part 6. The Summer Plague. The summer of 1849 did not bring the sweetness of blossoms or the golden sunshine people had longed for. Instead, it arrived with an oppressive heat, the land cracking dry cattle wasting thin for lack of grass. And before the town could even manage enough drinking water for each household, a new calamity struck, an unknown sickness, spreading swiftly among the children. It began with Tommy Henderson, son of a stubborn farmer. The boy burned with fever, his skin breaking out in strange red blotches. At first, they thought it heat stroke, but within 2 days, 3 more children collapsed with the same affliction. Weak moans, labored breaths. Fevered eyes echoed through Cedar Ridge, sowing dread in every heart. The only doctor in the region, Richardson had departed for the city, his own mother gravely ill. Cedar Ridge was left with no one to turn to. Fathers could only stand helpless as their children writhed. Mothers prayed desperately, clutching their little ones with no hope left. In that despair, one name arose: Helena Mackenzie. It began with pounding fists at her door on a sweltering afternoon. Martha Whitman, the woman who had once scorned her most bitterly, fell to her knees at the threshold, tears streaming. "Please, save my child. He's dying." Helena froze. This woman had humiliated her more times than she could count. But now her eyes held no pride, only the terror of a mother. "Bring him here," Helena answered firmly, without hesitation. Soon others followed. Families arrived with children burning with fever, carried in blankets, their mothers sobbing, fathers bowing in desperate pleas. The Mackenzie cabin became a makeshift infirmary. Helena arranged the children across the parlor, on chairs, even on blankets spread across the wooden floor. For days, Helena scarcely slept. She brewed remedies from herbs her mother had once taught her to use, mixed cooling draughts, wiped fevered brows, laid cold cloths upon burning foreheads. Liz, with her small, clumsy hands, fetched water, washed rags, and sang soft lullabies to the delirious. Peter, still unsteady from his injury, bore the heavy labor, hauling water, splitting wood, tending fires. Each time he saw Helena bent over a sickbed, drenched in sweat, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his chest tightened. This was no longer the woman he once thought a burden. This was the pillar of the entire town in its darkest hour. Coughs, cries, prayers filled the air. At times, Helena thought she might collapse, but whenever her resolve faltered, she remembered Liz's eyes upon her and her silent vow, "No child will die in my arms." On the 7th night, Tommy Henderson convulsed violently. Martha screamed in despair. Helena rushed to his side, cradling the trembling body, whispering, "You'll be all right, sweetheart. You'll be safe." She spooned bitter medicine between his lips, replaced cold cloths again and again. Hours passed. At last, the fever broke. Tommy's breathing eased. His eyes fluttered closed in rest. Martha fell to her knees, clutching Helena's feet, sobbing, "I was wrong. Oh God, I was so wrong." Helena lifted her gently, murmuring, "We are all mothers. When our children need us, there is no room for hatred." Those who witnessed wept silently. 2 long weeks passed. One by one, the children recovered strength, returning miraculously. Families poured through the Mackenzie doorway, embracing their little ones with tears of relief. Never had Cedar Ridge's square seen such a scene. James Henderson, the man who had mocked Helena most, stepped forward, removed his hat, and bowed low before her. His voice trembled. "I insulted you, treated you as nothing. But today, you saved my boy. Forgive me." Others followed, one after another, bowing, thanking her, hands trembling as they clasped hers. No more mocking laughter, no more disdainful glances, only respect, only gratitude. Helena bowed her head, tears streaming freely. In that moment, she knew all the months of scorn and rejection had been erased. Not by argument, not by pleading, but by devotion and unconditional love. That night, after the last family departed, Helena sat silently before the hearth. Peter came beside her, laid a hand on her shoulder. He spoke only one phrase, low and steady: "I'm proud of you." Helena looked up into eyes no longer distant, but filled with recognition. Her heart trembled, warmth flooding through her. She knew then, from this day forward, she was no longer the stranger wife in Cedar Ridge. She had become someone respected, acknowledged, and above all, loved. Part 7. Love takes root. Summer passed, and Cedar Ridge slowly recovered from the plague. The skies turned blue again. Wheat fields stretched green across the land, and at the Mackenzie Ranch, the air too changed in wondrous ways. Once the wooden house had been silent, filled only with the whistle of wind through the cracks and the echo of heavy footsteps. Now every meal was a melody. Lise chattered endlessly about her day. Helena stirred soup with a gentle smile, and Peter, the man once so sparing with words, spoke of ranch work, even making small jokes that sent Lise into peals of laughter. One morning, as the sun rose, Helena was surprised to find Peter already in the kitchen. Awkwardly, he placed a skillet on the stove inside a few slices of bacon, already a little burnt. His cheeks flushed as he stammered, "I thought you deserved a morning off." Helena laughed, her voice ringing through the small kitchen. It was the first time she saw Peter fumbling like a young man, eager to please the woman he loved. The sight softened her heart, bridging the distance that had once stood between them, replacing it with the sweetness of true companionship. In the evenings, when the firelight cast its golden glow across the wooden walls, the little family gathered together. Helena mended clothes, Lise played with a stray kitten she had found in the field, and Peter read passages of scripture aloud. His voice, deep and steady, filled the cabin with a peace Helena had never known before. She lifted her eyes to him. The man who had once been so distant now sat wholly present in his family. Every glance, every fleeting smile, every gentle touch of his hand, when passing her a cup of waterproof of a profound change. One night, after Lise had fallen asleep, Peter sat with Helena on the porch. The sky shimmered with stars' summer winds, carrying the scent of dried hay. He remained quiet for a long while, then spoke softly. "Helena, I once thought love came only from appearances. I lived blind to the truth for too long. But you've shown me love comes from courage and kindness. You saved me, my daughter, and this whole town. And I—" He paused, his hand finding hers. "I love you." Helena's breath caught her heart, racing eyes blurred with tears. The nights of loneliness, the years of mockery all dissolved into nothing. She needed no praise from the town, no perfection in others' eyes. All she needed was this moment Peter Mackenzie, once an unscalable wall, now opening his heart and naming his love for her. That love lived not only in whispered words, but in small, daily gestures. Peter began sharing breakfast with the family every morning. He spoke to Helena of his work in the fields, sought her thoughts on managing water, even tried her suggestions and found them useful. Lise, happiest of all, ran through town proclaiming Papa and Mama laugh all the time now. Each time Helena heard it, she blushed, but joy warmed her deeply. One afternoon, Helena carried lunch to Peter in the fields. She found him repairing the fence, sweat soaking his shirt muscles taut beneath the sun. He looked up, his eyes settling on her, then smiled a warm smile, nothing like the coldness of before. Helena blushed, her heart fluttering like a girl's at first love. Peter walked toward her, pulled a small wildflower from his pocket, and placed it in her hand. "Not as beautiful as you," he whispered. Helena pressed the flower to her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks. tears of pure happiness. The Mackenzie home, once a mere arrangement, had become a true haven. Laughter filled its rooms, meals were warm with companionship, and silent handclasps spoke more than words. In Helena's heart, a new faith blossomed. She had not only found love, but discovered her own worth. Love was not born of perfection, but of sincerity, of daring to give one's heart and receiving another in return. She looked at Peter at Lys and realized she finally had a family she had never dared to dream of. And in the firelit cabin, love took root, promising a springtime that would last forever in their hearts. Part 8. A New Gift. That year's harvest arrived beneath golden sunlight, spreading across the rippling wheat fields like an endless sea. The Mackenzie Ranch buzzed with life hammers, clanged, roosters crowed, and the laughter of ranch hands carried through the air. Amid the bustle, Helena carried a secret that filled her heart with joy. For weeks her body had been changing morning fatigue, racing heartbeat moments when she rested a hand on her belly and smiled quietly to herself. Then one evening, as the crimson sun sank behind the mountains, she took Peter's hand and whispered, "We are going to have a baby." Peter froze. Then in the moments that followed, his blue eyes brimmed with emotion. He pulled Helena into his arms, holding her tight as if afraid this joy might dissolve into a dream. Lys stood nearby, her eyes wide. "I'm going to have a little brother or sister." "Really, Mama?" When Helena nodded, Lys squealed, bouncing with delight, hugging her mother's belly and whispering, "Hello, baby. Sister." Lys will tell you lots of stories. In the months that followed, a new atmosphere filled the ranch. Peter became an almost comically careful husband, refusing to let Helena lift anything heavy. Each morning, he brewed her a cup of herbal tea, kneeling in the evenings to rub her swollen feet. Lys hovered constantly near her mother, pressing her ear to her belly, giggling whenever she imagined hearing baby noises. Helena felt her body changing day by day, but this time, instead of fear, she was filled with happiness. In Peter's eyes, she was no longer a substitute or the shadow of another memory. She was his wife, the mother of his child, the heart of their home. When autumn came and the maple tree outside blazed red, Helena went into labor. That night, beneath a shining moon, the wooden cabin was tense with silence. Peter paced like a caged animal, his rough hands trembling. Mrs. Patterson and several townswomen came to help. Lys curled on the porch, clutching her old bear, whispering prayers. Helena's cries of pain pierced Peter's chest, and he moved to rush in, but strong arms held him back. "Trust her. Helena is stronger than you think." And indeed, after long, weary hours, the sharp cry of a newborn rang out, pure fear shattering the night. A healthy baby boy with rosy skin and tiny fists reaching for warmth. "Samuel," Helena gasped, tears glistening. "His name will be Samuel, to honor my father." Peter sank to his knees beside the bed, gathering wife and child into his arms, tears streaming down his weathered face. Lys leapt forward, shouting with joy, "My brother, my brother." She kissed Samuel's chubby cheek again and again, her voice trembling with happiness. News spread quickly through Cedar Ridge. The next morning, families arrived with gifts, wool blankets, goat's milk, warm bread. They offered blessings for the Mackenzies and the newborn. Those who once sneered now clasped Helena's hands, gazing at Samuel with tenderness. Cradling her son, Helena felt renewal not only in her home, but in the whole community. This baby was not only flesh and blood, but a symbol of new beginnings. Whenever Peter held Samuel, his eyes shone with pride. He often whispered, "My son, you are proof that love can grow in the most unexpected places." At night in the glow of lantern light, Helena rocked Samuel, gently singing the lullabies her own mother once sang. Lys lay nestled against Peter, her face serene. The cabin overflowed with love and warmth so deep that Helena wept, but they were the sweetest tears she had ever known. She thought back to her first day in Cedar Ridge, stepping from the coach beneath scornful eyes. She had believed she would never be loved, never find a true family. But now, everything had changed. In her arms, she held her new gift, a child born of love and courage. And Helena knew from this day forward, their home would always be filled with laughter music and the unshakable truth that true beauty lies not in form, but in love that sacrifices and renews. Part 9. The Healer of a Town. 5 years had passed since that autumn night when Samuel's first cries filled the Mackenzie cabin. Time, like the wind, had carried away the harshest winters, leaving behind a Cedar Ridge transformed a town once filled with scorn and prejudice, now alive with laughter and compassion. And at the heart of that change was Helena Mackenzie, the soul of the community. In those years, Helena was no longer called cruel names, like the fat wife or the stranger. The people now addressed her with reverence, the midwife of Cedar Ridge. She had delivered more than 20 healthy children, her skilled hands guiding mothers through the fragile threshold between life and death. The first cries of newborns rang across the valley, always tied to Helena's unwavering devotion. It was said that no mother ever felt alone when Helena was near. She held their hands, hummed old lullabies, wiped sweat, and tears staying with them until the miracle of life appeared. Each child born became part of the quiet legacy she was building. The Mackenzie cabin, once the subject of gossip, had become a place of refuge. Families came not only for herbal remedies, but for counsel, for comfort. Afternoon tea with Helena grew into a ritual for many of the town's women. She did more than offer remedies, she listened. And her listening was so genuine that hearts grew lighter in her presence. Some came only to weep in her arms, leaving with brighter eyes, believing themselves strong enough to go on. Lys, now 13, was her mother's pride. She had inherited Helena's kindness and Peter's resilience, often assisting in births, fetching water, carrying clean cloths, or holding younger children's hands so they would not be afraid. Samuel, now 5, was the spark of the family. He ran through the fields, asking endless questions, his eyes brimming with curiosity. When Helena was weary, his bright smile was enough to wash the fatigue away. Peter, the man once known for his coldness, no longer hid his pride. He often stood silently on the porch, watching Helena tend to neighbors with patience and care, his eyes shining with admiration. Perhaps he saw most clearly the extraordinary transformation of his wife, from a woman scorned to the spiritual pillar of an entire community. People began to say that since Helena's arrival, Cedar Ridge had been blessed. Harvests were plentiful. The townsfolk grew more united, quick to help whenever hardship struck. Children grew, not in the shadow of harsh judgment, but in the shelter of kindness. Travelers from neighboring towns came to Cedar Ridge, drawn by tales of a community that honored true human worth. They wanted to see for themselves the woman who had changed everything. And when they met Helena, they saw not a figure of grandeur, but a humble woman, eyes gentle smile, warm, yet radiating a strength that left them silent. One autumn afternoon, as the sunset painted the wheat fields, Gold Helena and Liz gathered herbs together. Liz suddenly asked Mama, "Why do people trust you so much?" Helena paused, her gaze distant, then smiled softly. "It isn't because I'm better than anyone. It's because I never turned away. When people are in true need, all it takes is one hand reaching out, and they will never forget." Lise squeezed her mother's hand, her face glowing with pride. To her, Helena was not only Mama, but living proof of a truth she would carry forever. Beauty lies not in form, but in compassion. That night, Helena sat on the porch, beneath a sky thick with stars. She thought of her journey, from the day she stepped off the coach in Cedar Ridge with a wounded heart to this day when she was called the healer of a town. She knew her legacy was not only the children born, the illnesses cured, but the faith she had planted in the hearts of her people. Faith in kindness, in the strength of love, in the beauty of the soul. And that more than anything was what made Helena smile in peace. Part 10. Beauty of the Heart. Evening fell over Cedar Ridge, the last light spilling honey gold across the harvested fields. The Mackenzie cabin was livelier than ever, smoke curling from the chimney, mingling with the fragrance of freshly baked bread. Helena set a steaming pot on the table. Beside her, Lise moved quickly, setting out bowls and plates with the poise of a 14-year-old blossoming into grace. Samuel, never one to sit still, darted about proudly holding a smudged charcoal drawing on scrap wood, a house a cow, and their family of 4, hand in hand. Peter entered, laying his cowboy hat on the rack, sweat still beading his brow. He smiled at the familiar scene, his wife busy at the table, their children chattering. The smile Helena noticed no longer guarded, but brimming with pride and peace. Dinner began with laughter. Lise spoke of her lessons. Samuel boasted of catching a blue butterfly, and Peter talked about the coming season's planting. Helena listened, her heart swelling with fullness. Gone were the whispers of cruelty, gone the feeling of being an outsider. Here she sat at the center of the table, the thread binding them all together. After supper, when Lise and Samuel ran to play on the porch, Helena stepped into a small room. On the old wooden table stood a silver mirror, its surface dulled with age. She gazed at it, and for a moment, she saw her former self, the round, uncertain woman, stepping from a stagecoach into the snow eyes shadowed with shame. But the reflection now was different. The same face marked with lines of care, the same hands roughened from labor, the same body still full, unlike any ideal of beauty. Yet in her eyes, she saw something new, a beauty deeper than flesh, the beauty of kindness, of resilience, of love without condition. She touched the mirror lightly and whispered, "This is me, and I am beautiful in my own way." Night fell. The family gathered around the fire. Lise strummed a small guitar. Samuel leaned against his father's shoulder, drifting to sleep. Helena sat nearby, the glow of flames softening her face into rare gentleness. Peter watched her for a long while, then spoke quietly. "Helena, I once thought you were only a replacement, a name and a letter, but you have become the heart of this home. Without you, the children and I would not have the life we have today." Helena's chest ached, then warmed with tenderness. Her voice trembled. "I once thought I was unworthy of love, but you and the children showed me love isn't begged for. It's built with trust and kindness every day." Liz looked up, eyes bright. "Mama, you are the most beautiful person I know, not because of how you look, but because you've taught me how to love." Sleepy Samuel mumbled in agreement. "That's right. Mama's the most beautiful in the world." Laughter rang through the cabin, drowning out the wind outside. The years Helena had lived in Cedar Ridge had reshaped the town. No longer did people judge by appearance. They looked for worth in kindness and devotion. Children grew up with tales of the woman in the snow, once mocked, but who had changed everything through love. Helena knew her legacy lay not only in the children she delivered or the illnesses she cured. It was in the way the town had learned to love and respect one another. One evening, Samuel suddenly asked Mama, "Why do people say you're the most beautiful?" Helena smiled gently. "Because I know how to love." That simple answer was the sum of a lifetime. Helena understood true beauty is not found in form or in the eyes of others, but in the heart that dares to give and receive love. That night, as the Mackenzie family shared a late meal, laughter filling the wooden cabin, Helena looked at her husband, her children, and felt a peace she had never known. She no longer sought acceptance from anyone else. She had found it within herself and in the arms of those who loved her. Her story did not end with a noisy victory, but with a quiet, eternal truth. The beauty of the heart is the only beauty that never fades.